What response does seeing human suffering demand of us? I ask myself that question a lot. I've even made a career out of it as a filmmaker, documenting people in distress. I grew up watching my father struggle with mental illness. I was 17 when he took his own life. His suicide left me feeling acutely responsible for people in pain. But most of the time, I simply felt powerless. I'd been struggling with that feeling for years when I read this line. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Was paying attention an answer? I tracked down a biography of the woman who wrote that line. Her name was Simone Weil. I discovered she was a young French philosopher from the 1930s. She spent her life grappling with the urgent moral and political questions of her time. Years after she died, Albert Camus meditated in her room before going to Stockholm to receive the Nobel Prize. He describes Simone Weil as the only great spirit of our time. How did she pay attention? I decided to find out. This is as close as I could get to Simone Weil when I started this film. It's where she and her parents lived in 1942. They were Jews and had come to New York City to escape Nazi persecution in France. 4 months after they arrived, Weil returned to Europe to work for the Free French government in London. These were her parting words to her parents. If I had several lives, I would have devoted one of them to you, but I have only one life. 10 months later, she was dead. I was startled by how she died because it connected her to my father. What did she come to understand in her 34 years on this earth? I resolved to read as much of her work as I can, but it is daunting because she left behind the equivalent of 16 volumes this thick. Most of it was published after her death. She wrote about revolutionary politics, working conditions, and ancient Greece. About religion, human oppression, and war.
La vérité est trop dangereuse à toucher. C'est un explosif. Notre faiblesse peut à la vérité nous empêcher de vaincre, mais non pas de comprendre la force qui nous écrase. Les malheureux n'ont pas besoin d'autre chose en ce monde que d'hommes capables de faire attention à eux.
I linger over this last line because it makes me think about my brother Timothy, who has struggled with anxiety and depression ever since our dad died. Timothy is my older brother, but his depression means it's been hard for him to act like one. Instead, I often feel responsible for him.
Orientaliste en son temps. Ah bon? Ouais. Qu'est-ce qu'il dit? Attendez, vous allez bien manger un petit gâteau.
I can only find a few people left who knew Simone Weil. Jean Duchamp was a high school student when Weil taught her philosophy in the 1930s.
Elle a commencé par nous dire je vous interdis d'avoir un livre de philosophie. C'est moi qui vous donnerai tout. Vous prendrez mes cours et ça vous suffira. Donc je n'ai aucun livre de philosophie, j'ai jamais eu un livre. Et elle arrivait avec Homère, Platon, Goethe, etc. dans le texte. Et elle traduisait dans le texte. Elle traduisait le grec, le latin, l'allemand, l'anglais, tout.
During the First World War, at the age of 6, she stopped eating sugar in an act of solidarity with the soldiers on the front line who had none. When she was 10, her affluent Jewish parents found her a few blocks from their apartment at a labor union demonstration. At 25, she quit her teaching job to go work in a factory.
Et alors nous sommes allés visiter les usines avec Simone et toute la classe. Et alors à l'époque, je me souviens qu'elle avait demandé si elle pouvait voir les fiches de paye des ingénieurs, du patron. Elle trouvait que, je sais pas, que les patrons gagnaient trop d'argent et puis que les ouvriers n'en avaient pas assez. Elle avait la doctrine communiste, quoi. À partir de l'eau, alors, si vous voulez de l'eau.
Do you feel like her work has influenced you in any way?
Il y a des tas de choses, moi, qui m'en viennent comme ça parfois. Quand elle disait, quand vous avez à décider de faire quelque chose, faites toujours ce qui vous coûte le plus. C'est pas, j'ai essayé de le faire souvent et c'est pas commode. Hein, c'est pas commode. Et c'est vrai, c'est très vrai. C'est très vrai, ça. Ouais.
Always do what will cost you the most. As my government continues to wage war in Iraq and Afghanistan, these words of Vay's speak to me. Not to be an accomplice, not to lie, not to remain blind. And for how long have you been working on it?
Depuis 20 ans, peut-être même plus, 25 ans. Et je ne suis pas sûre de pouvoir être là jusqu'au bout. Il faudra que je passe la main, probablement. Et je trouvais en Simone Veil, d'abord l'intelligence la plus aiguë qu'il soit, mais surtout un ancrage qui m'entraînait vers la profondeur, vers une profondeur que je n'avais jamais rencontrée auparavant. L'alliance, si vous voulez, entre l'intellect, le plus exigeant qui soit, et le cœur. Parce que finalement, c'est une espèce de formidable synthèse, personnelle, certes, très personnelle, mais elle sentait que ce poids qui faisait équilibre dans sa pensée était de l'or pur. Elle oblige chacun à reconsidérer sa vie, sa pensée, les principes qui guident une vie et une pensée. Donc on ne sort jamais indemne de cette lecture.
I don't want to come away unscathed. I want her words and her deeds to affect me. I want to understand what paying attention requires. Because my father's death taught me that if I don't pay attention, someone might die. How are you starting?
I'm starting with a question that has been with me throughout the day, and that is, how long have I been so at ease when other human beings in the world are suffering? You know, it kind of brings tears because I always, I find I lack the courage to follow her example and her witness, and I feel Simone's presence, I feel that she's not judgmental, but she's saying, in the manner of Christ, come follow me.
What does it mean to follow Simone Weil?
She never wanted to talk about. She wanted to be part of what she was talking about. And she could only do it if she participated in it. So if she understood what the situation of the unemployed was, then she would go with them and talk with them and be one of them. And if she believed that they didn't have enough wood to heat themselves, she would just forbid heat in her own house in order to feel what it is to be an unemployed, even when she was not in the street.
Tant qu'on ne s'est pas mis du côté des opprimés pour sentir avec eux, on ne peut pas se rendre compte.
In 1931, Weil expressed outrage at France's celebration of its empire at the Colonial Exposition in Paris. That same year, in this provincial French town, she helped organize a group of unemployed men to protest their mistreatment by the local government. She almost lost her teaching job because of the incident. Her response? I've always considered dismissal as the crowning of my career.
I think of her at a faculty meeting, smoking a cigarette and reading a book. When you attend conferences or meetings, and it's all about the ego, it's all about puffing oneself up to the exclusion of reality and of the suffering in the world. When there are wars raging and nothing can be said about them because, as one faculty member told me, that's outside the purview of this body. Simone would have none of it. None of it.
My older brother Timothy is an activist, music journalist, and Black Studies scholar. Growing up with him primed me to be drawn to Simone Weil.
Because I don't have the experience of being a Black person existentially or ontologically, that I therefore don't have access to what that must be like to deal with on a day-to-day level. Literally, from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed, you are Black in white space. There's a sense of incomprehension on other people's parts that you realize brings in the real divide, or the sort of the fissure, the gulf that exists forever between that person and you in terms of what they've been through.
Put it this way, I mean, what it comes down to is this. I don't think anyone could have prevented Dad from committing suicide. I just don't think any intervention by anyone could have prevented that from taking place, short of him being institutionalized and prevented from actually committing the act, you know?
I have a harder time believing his death was inevitable. Isn't there always something else that can be done? Timothy helps me research Simone Weil, and he emails me the quotations that ring true to him.
Ce qu'un pays appelle intérêt économique vital, ce n'est pas ce qui permet à ses citoyens de vivre, c'est ce qui lui permet de faire la guerre. Le pétrole est bien plus propre à susciter les conflits internationaux que le blé.
Inspired by Timothy and Simone Weil, I volunteered with a group that wanted to document and ensure that this time everyone's vote would get counted in the U.S. presidential election.
4 more years, we're gonna be back into slavery. And it ain't just gonna be Black folks, it's gonna be all the poor ones.
And they sent me over here. They told me I had to come over here.
And what happened when you came over here?
They told me I have to go over here.
I mean, I voted 3 years. I never had this problem before, you know. I never requested no absentee ballot. I never early voted, and now they say I voted. I never voted. I went and tried to vote, but my name wasn't there.
Request the provisional ballot.
Weil herself never voted. Women didn't get the right to vote in France until after she died. 60 years later, the electoral politics I was witnessing in the United States felt like a sham. And my country continued to inflict ever more suffering. A familiar feeling of impotence settled over me. Simply paying attention felt like a woefully inadequate response. I was beginning to think I didn't know what Weil meant about attention.
Les immeubles sont immenses, ils en oublient d'être modestes. Ils parlent, ils s'inventent, ils se ruinent en promesses. La vérité passe en procès, mais l'oubli la protège. Tous font croire qu'ils la possèdent. Y a de plus en plus de pauvres, mais les riches l'ont mauvaise. Y a de plus en plus de
What is happening here in the banlieue and now in other towns is raising some uncomfortable questions for France about integration, about how deep the racial divide is, about why a generation of young immigrant men is so angry.
Les humiliations infligées par mon pays ne sont plus douloureuses que celles qu'il peut subir.
Ne jure que par la bourse, ne mente que par la bouche. Avec les yeux, ils ne peuvent plus aujourd'hui nous voir en face. Allez dire à tous que le peuple boit la tasse. 2005, mais dis-moi qui se voit.
I arrive in Paris on a research trip a few days after the unrest subsides. Vey would have gone out to the worst-hit areas, but I don't. Turning my attention to the past feels easier. Vey never stopped looking. All I feel capable of is focusing on her. But how can I engage with her through an inanimate photograph? I need to see her standing, moving, breathing in front of me. So I make my way to the film archive at the French Communist Party headquarters. I know the archive doesn't have any catalog shots of her, but what if she was there, standing in a crowd as the camera panned by? I'm convinced that even a fleeting glimpse will help me get closer to her. I scan the crowds, willing her to appear before me. It's as if I believe that by finding her image, I'll be able to bring her back to life. That somehow she'll be in the room with me. Being here makes me think about how Vey used to stand up at union meetings and openly challenge Stalin's policies. Once her friends even had to physically protect her from angry party members. She never joined the Communist Party. She distrusted organizations of any kind. But still, in the early 1930s, she seemed deeply involved with finding political solutions to human oppression.
Lowered wages, long hours, and unemployment speeded up the city's trend toward the extreme political left. Communists recruited millions, became a potent political factor.
In her early 20s, she used to travel long distances each week to teach political economy in French to trade union members.
Les travailleurs doivent se préparer à prendre possession de tout l'héritage des générations antérieures. Cette prise de possession, c'est la révolution elle-même.
Hitler's predictions of disaster come true. Dependent on Allied loans, Germany's economy collapses when depression strikes the Western powers.
And then in 1932, she went to Berlin to see for herself how the communists were faring against the Nazi Party.
Everyone around her believed that the Communist Party in Germany was so powerful, it was the most powerful in Europe.
But this is what she saw.
Mon impression jusqu'ici est que les ouvriers allemands sont incapables de lutter. Ceux qui chôment depuis 2, 3, 4, 5 ans ne sont plus capables de l'énergie que demande une révolution. Des jeunes gens qui n'ont jamais travaillé, là des reproches de leurs parents, se tuent ou s'en vont vagabonder ou se démoralisent complètement.
Watching what was going on, how the German people had been destroyed as a nation, she realized that nothing would prevent Hitler to succeed. And she came back to France and wrote to this effect, and no one believed her. 1 year later, all her predictions were true.
Von den Zehntausenden, die Jahr für Jahr den Gashahn aufdrehen. Gelieren!
Elle a compris où gisait la folie des hommes. Et ce n'était pas simplement la folie telle que l'a jugeait Marx, à savoir la folie de l'exploitant sur l'exploité, mais c'était aussi la folie propre à l'humanité, c'était cette folie de la course au pouvoir.
The space and the time between the two world wars were a time for preparation of war. Simone Weil was intensely aware of it. She saw the whole world rushing towards violence and evil.
La force, c'est ce qui fait de quiconque lui est soumis une chose. Quand elle s'exerce jusqu'au bout, elle fait de l'homme une chose au sens le plus littéraire, car elle en fait un cadavre.
When I can't find moving images of Vey, I start looking for her in the present day. I begin with her niece, Sylvie Vey, who I'm told looks uncannily like her.
So this is her childhood letters. And then here is a nice large photo of her as a teacher. So these are different ID photos of different times. He looks sad on this photo, and it's not clear to me why. He adored his daughter. It was towards the end of the war, and he got very, very miserable during First World War. He treated soldiers who had typhoid, and he realized that they were given treatments that were not going to save them. Anyway, he got extremely depressed. This is Camus in my grandmother's study. Camus came to visit my grandmother rather often. My father gave a rather macho image of my aunt, and so I imagined her as even more powerful somehow that she might have been in her presence. I had the image of somebody who was just like my father, except happened to be a young woman.
I'd be curious to know more about how you reacted to her influence.
It was not so much her intellectual superiority that I was sensitive to, is that I was appalled by her moral superiority. And there again, there was no way I could catch up, because the other part of me didn't want to catch up at all. The other part of me wanted to be Brigitte Bardot. I mean, I went through years of absolutely wanting to be blonde with an upturned nose, a large chest, and a blonde ponytail. And so it was a bit of a struggle having Simone Weil on one side and Brigitte Bardot on the other. I admire my aunt for everything she did, but it's not my path at all. I never wanted to imitate her life.
And so my fantasy of finding Simone in Sylvie goes unfulfilled. But this only intensifies my search. I lament that I didn't interview Susan Sontag before she died. She was a public intellectual and an activist, deeply influenced by Weil. I see elements of Weil in my friends, in Anna Brown, and in my brother Timothy. Quite simply, I try to conjure her up everywhere, in people and in places. In 1934, Weil quit her teaching job and came here to work in a factory. She wanted to find out if the nature of factory work could inspire the worker-led revolution that Marx had predicted.
She wanted to become a worker in an assembly line. She was fascinated by what happens when a human becomes a pure machine, a human becomes a pure object. She could only know what she was talking about if she experienced it in her body.
In her writings about that time, she begins with a utopian vision of factory work.
Des roues qui tournent, des morsures sur le métal, des bruits qui parlent, de l'activité sérieuse, soutenue, ininterrompue de l'homme sur les choses. Les courroies de transmission, là où il y en a, permettent de boire par les yeux cette unité de rythme que tout le corps ressent par les bruits et par la légère vibration de toutes les choses.
But that is not the reality that confronts her.
Les choses jouent le rôle des hommes, les hommes jouent le rôle des choses. C'est la racine du mal. Tu es là pour plier, tout subir et te taire. L'attention exigée par le travail n'est compatible avec aucune autre. Parce qu'elle vide l'âme de tout ce qui n'est pas le souci de la vitesse. étant en usine, confondue aux yeux de tout et à mes propres yeux avec la masse anonyme. Le malheur des autres est entré dans ma chair et mon âme. Ce que j'ai subi là m'a marqué d'une manière si durable, aujourd'hui encore. Lorsqu'un être humain me parle sans brutalité, je ne peux pas m'empêcher d'avoir l'impression qu'il doit y avoir erreur. Depuis, je me suis toujours regardée comme une esclave.
And so Vey concludes, oppression that is clearly inexorable and invincible does not give rise to revolt, but to submission.
Son nom de plume. Faut que je me taise?
After 2 years of asking, Simone Vey's first cousin agrees to meet me. She grew up with Vey, and to be in the room with her feels as close as I'll ever get to Simone.
Est-ce que c'est votre premier entretien au sujet de Simone Vey?
Ah oui,
C'est la première fois?
oui, oui, oui.
Question, d'accord. It's the first time.
Probablement le dernier. Ne serait-ce que l'entrée en usine à cette époque. Parce que c'était un acte qui, dans son milieu, était tout à fait bizarre. Autant elle était intelligente et capable de raisonnement philosophique remarquable, autant elle était maladroite de ses mains. Elle voulait manger comme les ouvriers. Et on lui faisait croire que la nourriture qu'elle mangeait était la même que celle des ouvriers. Mais il était évident que quand elle serait livrée à elle-même, elle n'aurait pas cette espèce de contrepoids, un peu faux mais bien utile.
You said earlier that she felt privileged. Was there guilt about her social status in relationship to the workers?
Oui, mais ça n'explique pas, je serais la première à le dire, pourquoi cette culpabilité.
Oui.
Je serais la première à dire que je ne comprends pas pourquoi une culpabilité pareille. Moi qui étais née dans le même milieu, après tout, nous n'étions pas non plus nés dans l'or et dans la soie. C'était pas du tout un milieu richissime. C'était des bons bourgeois.
Elle est peut-être, comment dire, un peu obsédée par la souffrance. Je pense, quand même, oui, oui. Et probablement, et même à l'excès, en réalité, parce qu'elle a probablement imaginé les ouvriers souffrant plus qu'ils ne souffraient véritablement.
Raymond didn't seem to appreciate the Vey I was so drawn to. What I really want is to talk to Vey directly. So I decide to do an experiment. After all, Vey herself wrote, "Truth is not discovered by proofs, but by exploration." It is always experimental.
Throughout history, men have struggled, suffered and died to free the oppressed. Their efforts, when they did not remain sterile, have never led to anything except the replacing of one oppressive regime by another. Marx, who have observed this, thought he was able to demonstrate scientifically that things...
What would it be like to speak to somebody whose role was to become Simone Vey? Would that satisfy me?
It is this idea which we have preserved as an article of faith.
First, she needs to prepare.
Si nous devons périr dans les batailles futures, faisons de notre mieux pour nous préparer à périr avec une vue claire du monde que nous en banlieue. She must have been a very strong individual to be always alone. I think she was very alone.
I rent office space in what used to be a canning factory. Now it feels like the perfect place to situate Simone. Maybe one day I can sit across from her and ask my questions.
Come in.
But I'm getting carried away. Doesn't she first have to experience some of what Vey went through?
When she talks about a woman who's working and her hair gets caught in one of the machines and a huge chunk of hair is cut out and there's a gaping wound, and this woman is expected to be back at work in a few hours. And Simone asks, will you see this woman as human, as someone who suffers because of the way that you've created your machines, your economic systems, your craving for profit?
Éviter donc les énormes ensembles industriels. Elle a plaidé pour que l'on favorise les petites unités qui permettent de rester humaines, où l'on peut se connaître entre soi et où chacun peut comprendre de quoi il s'agit et connaître le travail de l'autre.
I realize I'm getting captivated by my rather strange experiment. Do I really think she's going to be able to bridge the gap between the dead and the living?
Simone Weil realized that how could workers ever be able to imagine a better world if they didn't have time to think?
I remember a Simone Weil quote that Timothy sent me. The word revolution is a word for which you kill, for which you die, for which you send the laboring masses to their death, but which does not possess any content.
She realized that every revolution would be crushed in blood, and that nothing could be expected from this way of dealing with politics. And so she became much more realistic in that respect. She didn't renounce Marxism as a tool, she renounced communism.
Ce n'est pas la religion, c'est la révolution qui est l'opium du peuple.
Vey voiced her disillusionment with communism to one of its primary architects, Leon Trotsky. He was staying with the Veys in this apartment building where Vey regularly provided political exiles a safe place to sleep and to hold meetings. Trotsky accused her of being counter-revolutionary. Why, he asked her, do you have doubts about everything?
She used to sit there, just behind this pillar. I think that it was to separate herself from the people who were sitting around and to concentrate on what she heard from the singing of the monks.
J'avais des maux de tête intenses. Chaque saut me faisait mal comme un coup et un extrême effort d'attention me permettait de sortir hors de cette misérable chair. De la laisser souffrir seule, tassée dans son coin, et de trouver une joie pure et parfaite dans la beauté inouïe du chant et des paroles. Cette expérience m'a permis, par analogie, de mieux comprendre la possibilité d'aimer l'amour divin à travers le malheur. Il va de soi qu'au cours de ces offices, la pensée de la passion du Christ est entrée en moi une fois pour toutes.
In 1935, Simone Weil had her first mystical experience soon after leaving the Renault factory. 3 years later, at the age of 29, Weil, a secular Jew, had her third and most definitive one here at the Solesmes Monastery.
She was brought up in an atheist family. Her brother was completely atheist, and she went to the state schools in France, which were absolutely against any religion.
Le christianisme est par excellence la religion des esclaves. Que des esclaves ne peuvent pas ne pas y adhérer, et moi parmi les autres.
I'm not a religious person and can't help but feel betrayed by Weil's turn towards God. Did this mean she was giving up on political struggle altogether? I'm trying to make sense of Weil's move towards Christianity when I come to Le Puy, a place she lived and taught before her mystical experiences. It's a town known for its religious pilgrims and its enormous red Virgin Mary. Weil's college nickname had been Red Virgin, red for communist, virgin for her lifelong avoidance of physical intimacy. Was faith her last bulwark against existential loneliness? Against her despair at where the world was headed?
Elle a vécu plus vite que quiconque. Elle a brûlé les étapes. Elle fonçait vers le but qu'elle s'était assigné, et ce but qu'elle s'était assigné, cette belle route, l'a fait tomber dans le christianisme.
You know, when people hear the word supernatural, you know, I don't know if we're quite sure what to make of that. But it is fundamental to Weil's thought. And We have to keep in mind that for Vey, you didn't get to the realm of faith or the supernatural until reason had been completely exhausted, that there really wasn't anywhere else to go.
Anna Brown's words echo in my head. There really wasn't anywhere else for her to go. Would Vey find some solace in her faith? I want to ask her about her encounter with God, but all I can do is take my experiment one step further. I've asked the actress to come ready to do an improvised interview.
I mean, I guess for me, then that feels like what you're saying is that in religion lies an answer or the answer.
No, not in religion. In experiencing true suffering.
But do you think that your suffering is helping other people?
I do. I think that the only way that I will understand other people's suffering is to share it with them. And that is the only way I could fix it or create a remedy for it.
It sounded like something Vey might have said. But what if you can't find a remedy for it? Vey was looking for a remedy on a global scale, but what was starting to feel most urgent to me was my own brother Timothy's worsening anxiety.
You treat anxiety the way you do physical pain, because as Purcell put it, he said not to be melodramatic, but it's torture, right? It's somatic torture. You're constantly worried, sweating, constantly having this dread of fear and a sort of pit in your stomach of just fear and catastrophe. I'm talking about an existential reality of day-to-day increasing amounts of anxiety and the willingness for me to put up with that. And ethically, one can make certain choices, and it's hard to imagine putting up with a lot of anxiety just so that I can try something else to see if that works. I mean,
So often, I stand there feeling powerless to relieve Timothy of his distress, and then offer what seems like a useless piece of advice.
Like I said, the only way to do it would be to be on Klonopin and get into a non-anxious state, such that I could actually practice some of those things, like meditation, like sitting still.
Start gradually. I mean, I think it's like a gradual going down on the medication and an increase or implementing certain things. No, I mean, I don't think it has to be like you have to just stop taking the medication.
No, because you can't do that. But the point is, what I'm saying is that I don't.
If I can't do anything to help him, then it seems like all I can do is be unhappy alongside him. Anything else would feel like a betrayal. Simone Weil was a pacifist, but she believed that if war could not be prevented, she should share in the hardship of her comrades. So in 1936, she enlisted with a group fighting against Franco's fascists in the Spanish Civil War. They were bombed from the air a few days after Weil joined the unit.
On revient à ses places respectives, se planquer.
Je m'étends sur le dos. Je regarde les feuilles. Le ciel bleu. Un jour très beau. S'ils me prennent, ils me tueront. Mais c'est mérité. Les nôtres ont versé assez de sang. Je suis moralement complice.
priest was almost shot in front of her by the anarchist militia. She grew troubled by the summary execution of other prisoners of war.
Any resource to violence or to what she called force was a denial of humanity. As soon as violence is unleashed, it contaminates everything.
When a friend asked her afterward if she'd been willing to use her gun, she replied, "Fortunately, I am so nearsighted, I don't run the risk of killing anyone, even when I shoot at them." One morning, she stepped by accident into a scalding hot pot. Severely burned, she returned to Barcelona, where her parents were waiting. Because of her injury, she didn't return to the front. 3 years later, the fascists declared victory. In the late 30s, Vey's migraines were getting worse.
Un moment est venu où j'ai cru être menacée par l'épuisement et l'aggravation de la douleur. Que pendant plusieurs semaines, je me suis demandé avec angoisse si mourir n'était pas pour moi le plus impérieux des devoirs. Quoiqu'il me parût affreux que ma vie dût se terminer dans l'horreur, seule une résolution de mort conditionnelle et à terme m'a rendu la sérénité.
When war broke out in 1939, Vey renounced her pacifism once and for all. She proposed a plan to parachute troops and arms into Czechoslovakia to help overthrow the German occupation. She insisted that she must be allowed to go on the first mission.
It may be that the work of witness brings one to the battlefields of the world, brings one to the refugee camps of the world, as I had experienced this past summer in Palestine and Israel. And there, finally, you just have to walk the walk and come what may.
She wanted to be able to be in a position to experience what was happening in its excessive level in order to really grasp what the situation was about. She didn't want to survive, she wanted to understand.
Did paying attention ultimately require a willingness to die? When Hitler invaded Paris in 1940, Simone and her parents fled to southern France. It's here, where she helped bring in the grape harvest, that I get a glimpse of a happier Simone.
Le beau, c'est quelque chose à quoi on peut faire attention. En tout ce qui suscite chez nous le sentiment pur et authentique du beau, il y a réellement présence de Dieu.
voyez que Simone Veil se mettait sur ce banc et qu'elle méditait sur ce banc. Voilà. Et c'est le banc tel qu'elle l'a vu.
Then I discover that during the harvest, her sandals bit into her feet and made them bleed. And fellow workers expressed concern that she ate only raw onions and tomatoes. A friend asked her the question I would have liked to ask. Why do you do this, Simone? Her reply, there are things I would not be able to say if I had not done these things. She began reciting the Lord's Prayer in Greek every morning.
Parfois, les premiers mots déjà arrachent ma pensée à mon corps et la transportent en un lieu hors de l'espace, d'où il n'y a ni perspective, ni point de vue.
Because she was loving everything, and for her, all religions, all systems are to be known and loved, and you have no right to reject one of them. So she could not choose. To choose would be a lie.
Her reasons for not choosing the Catholic Church were also about the institution itself.
D'où un malaise de l'individu dans le christianisme, presque depuis l'origine, et notamment un malaise de l'intelligence. La fonction propre de l'intelligence exige une liberté totale, impliquant le droit de tout nier et aucune domination. Après la chute de l'Empire romain, qui était totalitaire, c'est l'Église qui, la première, a établi en Europe une ébauche de totalitarisme.
I admire how she remained true to her extremely high standards of intellectual honesty. But if politics and religion are suspect, where is she leading me? In 1942, Simone and her parents secured passage to the United States. They desperately wanted to stay and work with the resistance, but her parents wouldn't leave without her. Had they stayed, they almost certainly would have been identified as Jews. So to save their lives, she accompanied them. She returned to Europe 4 months later to work for the Free French government in London. She wanted to implement her frontline nursing plan, where a small group of women willing to sacrifice their lives would treat wounded soldiers in the midst of combat.
Évidemment, une assez grande quantité de courage serait indispensable à ces femmes. Un courage qui n'est pas échauffé par la volonté de tuer, qui au point du plus grand péril soutient le spectacle prolongé des blessures et des agonies. Ce regard est d'abord un regard attentif, où l'âme se vide de tout contenu propre pour recevoir en elle-même l'être qu'elle regarde tel qu'il est, dans toute sa vérité.
She volunteered herself for the first mission. When the plan was presented to Charles de Gaulle, he exclaimed, "But she's mad."
She was no longer rational in a sense. I mean, if you say that like it's not rational to want to kill the self, like is that irrational?
No, I'm not saying that it's not rational. I'm saying that.
But it's also a desire to
bringing
martyr
light-
yourself.
It's bringing light to others.
But from what I can tell, it's really only about ultimately killing yourself. I mean, you don't eat enough, you don't take care of yourself.
I'm not killing myself. If I wanted to kill myself, then I would stay in New York. That's killing myself. What am I supposed to just stay and not do anything? And so I decided to be able to fight as a woman and to be able to go and help the soldiers who were afflicted. I was very unhappy with my physical abilities are not able to allow me to get to where I really want to get to, that I really think that I'm meant to be doing in this world and what I need to say. That takes away my attention, that takes away my clarity. But in order to become more attentive, and the moment that I have really experienced and felt that I was completely attentive and free of all this pain was through this experience of God and through this experience of becoming his slave. And that is where the truth is. You look so puzzled when I'm telling you these things. What is it? I'm not giving you what you want.
But that's partly my stance. Like, I am skeptical of you.
So let's just.
But I do feel that sometimes you're pushing me into an answer that you want to hear.
No, I'm just pushing you, and I have no idea what I want to hear.
No, there's something you want to hear.
Or was there something I wanted to say? I'm looking at her as if I'm in love. And when you love someone, you don't want them to die. Was this whole experiment about me wanting to say to her, I don't want you to die?
Le malheur répandu sur la surface du globe terrestre m'obsède et m'accable au point d'annuler mes facultés. Et je ne puis les récupérer et me délivrer de cette obsession que si j'ai moi-même une large part de danger et de souffrance. Qui me préserverait d'être stérilement consumé par le chagrin.
England is the country where my brother Timothy and I were born. It's where my father grew up, and it's where he's buried. The Nazis started bombing England when he was 8. But it wasn't a bomb that killed Simone Weil. In April 1943, she was found unconscious in her rented room in London. Soon after, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. The only cure was to eat and sleep, but she refused to eat more than the rations afforded her fellow countrymen in occupied France.
Tu crois que j'ai quelque chose à donner? J'ai moi-même aussi une espèce de certitude intérieure croissante qu'il se trouve en moi un dépôt d'or pur qui est à transmettre. Seulement l'expérience me persuade de plus en plus qu'il n'y a personne pour le recevoir.
By August, she was dead. Her death certificate reads, "The deceased did kill and slay herself by refusing to eat, while the balance of her mind was disturbed."
It's kind of like this philosophical dead end. Is where she got herself. The world was doomed to destroy itself. There was nothing she could do. You know, as Camus says, the only real philosophical question is whether one should commit suicide or not.
La plénitude de l'amour du prochain, c'est simplement d'être capable de lui demander « Quel est ton tour ?»
As I'm editing this film, I receive news that Timothy is dead. Like Simone's death, his was an ambiguous suicide. This is how he described himself. "I'm a loving, caring, empathic person trying to survive in a culture dominated by free market, neoliberal values, white supremacy, patriarchy, and the loathsome cult of individualism. Black studies is a calling to me as strong as some folks' religious fervor, and without music, my life would be a mistake." Faye's words speak to me with a heart-wrenching truth. The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. All I can do is wonder if it was more attention that he needed and less advice. The world feels unbearably empty without him. Simone Weil had no limits when it came to feeling responsible for other people. But the logic of her position was death. In confronting her, I have had to define my own limits. It feels like staying in this world takes as much courage as it does to leave it. I grieve my brother's death and struggle to make sense of Simone's legacy in the here and now. The question that she posed remains: how do we know and understand other people without walking in their shoes? How else is compassion born and injustice decried?
As the pangs of hunger bear down upon us these next 9 days, let us be mindful of the fact that those who are force-fed in Guantanamo are those who have fasted for over 21 days in a row. Simone Weil commends to us that compassion is able to transfigure even the most purely physical suffering, such as cold and hunger.
One paper in Portland, Oregon picked up the story. The hunger strike in Guantanamo is up to 45. And that's the voice that we are joining our voices with.
The men at Guantanamo and expressing their outrage and their protests at the...
3 years ago, Anna Brown traveled to Cuba with others from Witness Against Torture. In their official statement, they wrote, "We hold the treatment of prisoners at Guantanamo Bay as a mirror to our societal soul. As long as some of us are degraded, all of us are. As long as some of us are chained, none of us are free."
Deux prisonniers dans des cachots voisins, qui communiquent par les coups frappés contre le mur. Le mur est ce qui les sépare, mais aussi ce qui leur permet de communiquer. Ainsi, nous et Dieu. Toute séparation est un lien.